Welcome, and thanks for joining me on this intrepid journey as we explore and uncover mysterious and elusive tales of some of the world's most famous, lost and forgotten treasures. There's something about treasure and the act of seeking it that has intrigued humanity since time began. From ancient rituals to buried pirate treasure to hoards of fascinating and mystical artifacts acquired through war and brutal conquests, through to tracing our history in order to understand our past. I have long been fascinated by treasure and the journeys in which humanity has long embarked on in order to acquire it. The search for historical clues, precious materials, and immense knowledge. But for me, it's more about the immersive stories than the riches and power sought out by the explorers who seek such treasures. Because, for the majority, it's only the stories, myths, and legends that in the end remain, while the rest is lost to history. And in some way, it's fascinating in itself, as it opens the doors for further stories to be retold. So you see, the real treasures are the stories themselves. In this episode, we'll be kicking cactus along the rugged trails of the Old West as we go and search for clues as to the legendary final bounty treasure of one of the most notorious cowboy bandits to ever roam the harsh, dusty terrains of the Wild West. An outlaw whose bloodline origins, strangely enough, stem from the United Kingdom, with his father Maximilian Parker born in Lancashire and mother Anne Campbell Gillies, born in Northumberland. The converted Mormons of whom together would spawn one of the most notorious outlaws to grace the Old West, a farmhand who would etch his brand into the bindings of Golden Age storybooks and become a household name. And with that said, let's embark on this cryptic and elusive story together. Butch Cassidy's Final Bounty. Stories of the Old West have always captivated and intrigued throughout time, though I'm unsure if it's the allure of vast new lands, wild open freedom, or just the excitement of witnessing a whiskey-fueled six-shooter duel at high noon that inspires. Whatever the case may be, this tale is sure to make its victims dance to the tune of lead bullets as they exit the barrel of a polished Colt revolver and ricochet off warped wooden planks, powdered dirt streets, and iron steam-powered beasts. The firstborn of 13 siblings, Robert Leroy Parker, born April 13, 1866 in Beaver, Utah Territory, cradled by his English immigrant parents Maximilian and Anne, both of whom immigrated to North America, arriving in Salt Lake City between 1856 and 1859, and within a few short years of their flocking west and courting, wedded in July of 1865, the newlyweds now settling down into their new life as Mormon pioneer ranchers. A life that would see a young Robert Leroy Parker grow up learning how to rustle cattle and hustle in the stocks of dairy farms. A young boy who became an expert cowboy, spending many of his early years molded into the saddle, grinding the rough terrain of mountainous cattle trails. Early depictions of Robert cast the image of a devoted son, one who would entertain his kin playing woeful tunes on the harmonica while cooped up in his family log cabin in their pioneer ranch in Circleville, Utah. The wiry tunes played to the backdrop of his father's readings of the doctrines of the Latter-day Saints, though, as it turns out, a saint the young cowboy most certainly was not. Now, as one can imagine, the life of a Mormon pioneer rancher was a rigid and straight existence, to say the least, with little room in the daily routine for excitement or adventure. A lifestyle which the restless Robert Leroy Parker at a point in his adolescence led the young man to ponder alternative lifestyles when, during his early teenage years, Robert grew tired of the claustrophobic ideals of the Mormon pioneer life deciding to carve out his own destiny, made the bold decision to abandon the ways of the Mormon pioneer lifestyle and pursue his own fate. At the ripe age of 18, vacating the family ranch in search of a more adventurous life, his final words delivered to his mother. "Ma, there's not much here for me. No future, pay in Utah is low. You know that. Maybe $20 or $30 a month with board. And the board's not much to brag about in most places. There's no excitement around here. I'm not a kid anymore. I gotta be thinking about my future." Now, with his boots strapped, his mind made, Robert set off into the wilderness, initially taking up trade as a farmhand, working cattle at a dairy ranch, where, during his time, he met and befriended a gritty cowboy and elusive cattle thief, going by the name Mike Cassidy. Cassidy, a man who also took his hand to the trade of working on several dairy ranches, a man who would ultimately become a highly influential friend and mentor for the young and mischievous Robert Leroy Parker. It's believed that the young Robert Parker committed his first minor offense in the Wild West in 1880, while venturing to another town to acquire a more fashionable get-up. It is said that Robert came across a clothier trading store, which was, at the time, closed for trading for the day. Despite the fact, Robert forced his way into the clothier store, snatching a new pair of blue denim threads, as well, oddly enough, a scrumptious slice of homemade pie. However, before hightailing off with his new fashion accessories and freshly baked trail snack, Robert deposited a handwritten IOU note at the counter, proclaiming that he would return to the clothier to settle the bill next time he passed by the store. Unfortunately for Robert, the store owner took offense to the break-in, as one would expect, pressing charges against the peckish denim thief, resulting in a court hearing in front of a judge and jury. Despite the cheeky pastry-fueled act, Robert was acquitted of the crime by the jury at the criminal trial. As a result, Robert walked a free man, warm-bellied in his new blue threads. Now that we've staked out the landscape of the infamous cowboy becoming outlaw, peeking over the rail from a distance, let's take a closer look at the notorious cowboy's journey by following the trail of the dusty hoofprints as Robert flees his old life and chisels a new story into the loot chests of unsuspecting victims. Now, after what some would call a tight escape, Robert coming down from his lucky encounter with a furious clothier, Robert went back to working ranches as an expert cowboy, rustling up cattle until 1884 before moving to Telluride, Colorado, where he sought alternatives to the dairy work that had helped the young man become into his own, though it's whispered that the move to Telluride may have been credited to the illegal transportation of stolen horses to buyers in the area. To support that theory, Robert, while laying low, took opportunity to shift direction and turned his hand to a brief stint working in a butcher's store in Rock Springs, Wyoming, the very place where Robert Leroy Parker, at the butt of jokes of Matt Warner, a close friend of his friend and mentor Mike Cassidy, a man who frequented the butchery, granted Robert Leroy Parker his new nickname, Butcher, which was subsequently later abbreviated to Butch. Around the same time, Butch saw an opportunity to enrich his new brand, and in order to protect his family name and honor, chose to change his name entirely, dedicating its appointment to his great mentor and old friend, Mike Cassidy. The once Robert Leroy Parker, now known as Butch, adopting his now infamous title as Butch Cassidy. And it seems that with that, the dusty, tumbleweed-ridden trails were about to take Butch in an entirely new direction. Butch, now with his new identity, entered a new era of Wild West crime, stealing horses, cattle, and engaging in other petty crimes. However, it was in 1889 when Butch made his grand entry into the Outlaw Hall of Fame, committing his first major successful bank robbery. Along with his new criminal associates, Matt Warner and Tom McCarty, taking loot from the vaults of the San Miguel Valley Bank in Telluride, making off with bounty worth around $21,000 at the time. The heist taking ink on the printing press as the story reads in the old magazine, Wild West. It is also recounted by a witness to the robbery that Butch, in the weeks leading up to the heist, had spent many hours training his trusty steed to stand calmly at the ready as he sprinted up to the getaway horse, leaping into the saddle. Essential steed training, which would ensure the escape was seamless and quick as they darted off into the dusty, barren landscape. The gang of outlaws are also said to have made custom extra-large leather saddlebags to accommodate the hoard of loot they were set to carry, as well as catering to the loot, strategically plotting their escape well in advance of the heist, ensuring a hasty getaway, compounded by a relay of fresh steeds at plotted points along the exit trail, giving them the advantage of speed, aiding the men in evading any ensuing chases, be it lawman or disgruntled detective. The meticulous San Miguel robbery strategy would become the signature for all future heists, executed by the cowboy outlaw and his shady associates, who together now entered the realm of notorious Wild West crimes. During 1896, after a string of robberies, heists and continued minor offences, Butch found himself for a short term behind bars, during which time he met the infamous Harry Longaber, aka the Sundance Kid. Now a friend to the ranks of his outlaw associates, another like-minded cowboy who also had hankering for robbing banks and loot-laden express trains, the troublesome duo becoming known as the notorious Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, along with their other associates making up the ranks of the now coined Wild Bunch. A modern version of the Old West story of Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, and the Wild Bunch, told in The Legend of Butch and Sundance, a TV film which first aired in 2004. It is told that Butch and his criminal associates, the Wild Bunch, were racking up on average $35,000 per robbery, the bounty adding to their infamous notoriety and hoard of ill-gotten treasures. However, it is still believed that the outlaw cowboys likely only officially robbed 4 banks, 4 express trains, and the pay office of a major coal company. Despite this, the gang would receive the blame for almost every robbery at the time which took place in the Northwest. A scolding mark which meant that Butch lived out most of his life on the run from those who sought to bring him down, including the famous Pinkerton Detective Agency and other tough lawmen, spending a good majority of time evading capture by taking refuge in safe houses and robbers' roost in the southeast of Utah. By early 1900, it seems Butch began to tire of life on the run. In search of a way out, began plotting his final heist as a notorious outlaw robber. With the Wild Bunch at his side, he put in motion a plan to pull off his last Grand Slam robbery in the hopes of buying a new life elsewhere, far from the fast-encroaching Pinkertons. With a plan and a target in place, Butch and the Wild Bunch robbed the First National Bank of Winnemucca, Nevada on September 19 in 1900, making off with thousands of dollars, of which it is said they acquired so much cash they were unable to carry the majority of the loot. It's believed that Butch had buried a substantial amount of the loot and caches in and around the Robbers Roost area in Utah before galloping his way to the safety of South America, where in 1901, Butch and the Sundance Kid are said to have bought a property in Cholula, Argentina. Several years later, on a hazy summer's day, on the 3rd of November 1908, a courier carrying the payroll of the Arameo Frank and Sia silver mine was attacked by 2 masked men near the small mining town of San Vicente in southern Bolivia, where 3 days later, on the 6th of November, the attacking duo lodged up in a small boarding house, where the boarding house owner became suspicious of the duo who had in their possession a mule bearing the mark of the Arameo Mine Company. And on that note, the man swiftly notified the closest telegraph officer, who sent word out to the Abaroa Cavalry Regiment, who was stationed nearby, who in turn dispatched 3 soldiers and, along with the chief of police, the local mayor and several officials, surrounded the boarding house with the intent on arresting the suspicious duo. As enforcement approached the boarding house, the duo opened fire on the approaching threat in an all-out gunfight which lasted several hours until 2 a.m, where a break in the fight gave way to the mayor overhearing the stark screams of a man in great pain, followed by 2 quickly released gunshots from inside the boarding house. The next morning, as the authorities entered the building, confirming the sighting of 2 male bodies peppered with bullet wounds to their arms and legs, each also with fatal shots, one man a single shot to the forehead and the other a single shot to the temple. Although the bandits were not officially identified, it is believed that the 2 men were in fact that of Butch and the Sundance Kid. And while there is much speculation as to the identities of the deceased men, the town of San Vicente stands as a major landmark in the case of the infamous outlaw duo's final stand. And despite rumours of sightings of Butch and the Kid after the fact, it seems the town of San Vicente has made its mind up as to the end result. So next time you're passing by the canyons of southeast Utah and the small town of San Vicente, it might pay to take a shovel. For now, it is very likely that much of the loot from the final bounty still remains buried and hidden beneath the harsh canyons of Utah, just waiting to be found. Or perhaps Butch and the Kid went back for their bounty, recovered it, and lived out their days as wealthy and law-abiding men, though highly unlikely. And so the end of this story is left to the imagination of those who go in search of the truth, leaving us without any doubt that Butch Cassidy's final bounty is worthy of a lost and forgotten treasure. Well, as the tumbleweed blows across the dusty trails, the story and legend of one of the West's most infamous and notorious outlaws leaves us with very little in the way of clues or hoof tracks, which might point to the direction as to the final bounty of the lost and forgotten final bounty of Butch Cassidy. Throughout this elusive and bankroll journey, we are presented again with questions that lead to nothing more than dust than answers from credible sources. At the same time, we have been, and remain, mesmerized by the story. Join me next time for another episode of Lost and Forgotten Treasures. I'm your intrepid storyteller. Lost and Forgotten Treasures is an audiocast written and produced by me, Roger Adams, with the help, of course, from the internet, whose archives from multiple contributors have allowed me to research, interpret, and retell these stories. I hope you've enjoyed travelling with me through time, and whether you found some answers, liberated your ears, or merely just found this story intriguing, I hope you'll join me on the next. For now, keep searching for your treasure, whatever it may be. Until next time.